everyone. Welcome again. Our next speaker is from the Department of Mathematics from the School of Science and Engineering. Their session is about synchronous lectures and graded recitations in math and what their students found effective. Please give a warm of applause to Sir Jude Buot.
Thank you so much. Okay, good afternoon. I'm Jude Buot from the Department of Mathematics. I would like to share with you my experiences or some of the things that I've done in conducting synchronous lectures and grade recitations in my math class in the second semester. In particular, I would tell you what items were effective in the perspective of my students. The reason why I wanted to give this talk in this forum is because of some of the feedback that our department or my colleagues have been in terms of number one, attendance during sync sessions and lack or absence of teacher-student engagement. Just to give you some context, most, if not all, of the courses in the math department, especially calculus, is delivered through synchronous sessions during our class period. And so I've been receiving a lot of feedback from my colleagues that towards the end of the semester or at the end of the quarter, attendance during sync sessions tend to dip. Sometimes out of 30 students, you even have less than 10 attendees. There's also the lack or absence of student engagement or student to student or teacher to student engagement during sync sessions. So I hope that with this talk, you can pick out some of the ideas because luckily for me, I've never had these issues in the second semester. The attendance usually for my classes were on the average 80% from until the very end of the semester. And I'm proud to say that I think I've established some engagement with my students throughout the semester. Let's start with synchronous lectures. So I'm also one of those who deliver most of the content synchronous lectures. My schedule last semester was an MWF, so I have a 1 hour lecture. And one of my strategies is to make sure that music is being played at the start or upon entry of the students in the Zoom meeting. It's actually to avoid dead air. Nagki-cringe ako pag walang nangyayari because most students don't really turn on their cameras. And what can be made more interesting with this approach is that I asked my students at the start of the semester what song recommendations they can give me. So I did listen to all the recommendations. So it will be a point of discussion even at the start of the session because they would feel kilig, diba? That their choice of song is being used in the lecture. For a 1 hour lecture, I've tested this so many times. I've realized that I only need 10 slides, including sample exercises for a 1 hour lecture. That's always my rule of thumb. Sometimes in mathematics, one problem would take me like 2 or 3 slides worth of space just to write its complete solution. So I count that as well in my 10 slides. Whenever I start sharing the screen, I never jump into the lesson right away. So my first slide is always a 1 minute synthesis of what transpired during the previous session. That means I don't necessarily assume that they watched the recording, especially if they did not join the previous session. Or one way to do this is I start my session by solving a problem similar to the problems last session. So it's a quick recall. And for almost all my exercises in math, I never write down the solutions. They just see the statement, the copy of the math problem on my slide, but I actually do solve the problems live. And that means I have to use, a notepad or an iPad to do the solutions. That means it feels like they're in actual classroom. I sometimes make mistakes, and students are not afraid to, point out also maybe some typos along the way. Now, as promised, some of my students did point out the positive effects of these items in the previous slide through student feedback. FYI, these are not taken from my student evaluation. What I did was, after the release of their second semester grades and ISIS, I mustered the courage to send an email to all my students telling them that I would want to know exactly what made our classes effective and engaging. And here are some of the things that they told me. First, one student said it's evident that the teacher was interested in teaching. Nagmamatter yun sa kanila. It makes them enthusiastic. Another student appreciated that I was playing music because she liked the vibes pre-class. And again, as mentioned, there's some point of discussion already, right? It parang nawawala yung shyness nila. There's no dead air baga. Another student said that she liked the modules because it did not contain so much information. That means it's not overwhelming. They have to attend the sync classes to learn and understand the lessons better. Now, for the calculus course that I was teaching, it's also important for us to discuss the abstract concepts and for them to go through the rigor of mathematical proofs. So I've decided to not do the rigorous proofs or put too much abstraction during my synchronous sessions. So my synchro sessions were more of routine. And so I allowed the Canvas pages to cover the more abstract. That means for more abstract concepts, usually I release a handout or point them to a particular reading a week earlier. And I emphasize that they need to read those things before they attend the sync session. Another student said that the synchronous session did not feel too rehearsed. It was not strictly lecture format. And this is something that we can demonstrate our students, that as teachers, sometimes we also make mistakes. Although I did solve the problem and I have a solution ready, I don't really look at my solution. I There are instances where I also make mistakes. So it's also a way to tell them how to check the mistakes on how, or they would know how I was able to, detect those mistakes. And another student talked about how I pause intentionally or slow down writing. There are even instances that I stop share whenever there is really no feedback. So what I do is I tell them, because for example, I was expecting some reaction on a solution, and it seems to be that the chat is uh, too quiet. So sometimes I stop share and just ask them how they were understanding the lesson. So the pauses are very important, as what this student told me. It goes a really long way in the absorption. Now, for graded recitations, this is how I call my orals. Um, MWF, I schedule it for sync sessions. And for the TTH, I'm very lucky that the class assigned to me, we were able to negotiate on a particular time. And I meet with them 2 hours every TTH. So you can just imagine, for a 3-unit course last semester, I was meeting my class 7 hours a week, 4 hours on a TTH, graded recitations or orals, 1 hour MWF. So what are my graded recitations? This is an opportunity that I provide for them to make up for their mistakes in the quizzes. Because sometimes my quizzes are very challenging, or it's time pressure, just like the long test. A way to make up for the quizzes is to show up during graded recitations. To get full points in the graded recitations, I will give them a problem or problems, and then they will have to solve it while their video is turned on. Okay, and they will have to explain everything in detail. Sometimes I even have some follow-up questions. The good feature of my graded recitations is that even if students signed up for slots, the Zoom links will be distributed to the entire class. Meaning, if I don't feel confident attending the orals, I can watch my classmates perform the oral recitation. My graded recitations are not recorded. So if you want to see how others are doing it, you have to attend. And as one of my students jokingly said, my sign-ups for graded recitations were like buying tickets to a K-pop concert. Usually, I drop the sign-up on a Monday at 8 a.m., and all the slots usually are filled in the first hour. And if students attending the graded recitations suddenly decide to join and participate, they can do a walk-in. Here are some of the feedback that I got with regards to graded recitations. One student said, "This is actually what sets my section apart from the others." I'm pretty sure the other teachers were also doing orals, but I think what this student was trying to say is that our orals were quite different because they were given a chance to really work hard on the 20%. In our syllabus, 80% is devoted to long tests. I know, 80%. So, alam nyo naman, the students are very anxious. We cannot do anything with the 80%. It's a departmental test. So, I gave them a little flexibility to earn the 20%. It gave a balance of pressure to do well and a feeling of ease that they could make up for the grade recitations. It encouraged them even to study lessons regularly. As I've said, sync sessions, MWF, TTH, they can always go to a graded recit. Today, I learned a topic, said one student. The next day or two, her understanding gets tested and corrected immediately. It's getting performance feedback in an instant. And that's one thing I would like to emphasize about graded recitation. It's not a summative assessment, it's actually more of a formative assessment. It's like a one-to-one consultation with your teacher. And then lastly, which is also a very nice feature, a student pointed out that it's an interactive way of gaining additional information. As I've said, I can only do 1 hour sync sessions. Some of the more abstract, the more theoretical parts are in the discussion boards. So if they want to know other techniques, if they want to know what their classmates are doing, they attend the sync session. So it's not even I'm not even necessarily the source of the information. Sometimes they pick out tips or solving techniques from their classmates. I don't even have to identify who are the smart ones in class. Even if they haven't met in person, they know exactly who to call or message if they want help in some of the problems. Now, I would like to end my talk with, some tips or insights. Okay, just to summarize my sharing. First, on sync sessions. These are my learnings last semester. First, do not overstuff your sync lectures. If I am given the choice that I would finish my sync lessons with no pauses and not finish my sync sessions, but I was able to do pauses, I would choose the latter. I would rather not finish my 1 hour plan, but I was really able to establish a good foundation because more often than not, my last few slides are basically the more complicated problems. And I actually give out my slides, even the slides that I was not able to discuss. So my students would know exactly what were the other problems supposedly discussed in sync. Second, take pauses. As mentioned by one of my students, it's very important to ask if they are able to follow the lesson. Diba? Walang point going to the more complicated if they didn't understand the basics. Also, ask simple questions. This is one thing I'm advocating. Sometimes teachers, no, we're so used to just asking them, can you type the final answer in the chat? But sometimes getting the final answer, they will have to do the entire solution. If you want to engage them, you can just ask simple questions such as, if I do this thing, is this correct? Write true or false in the chat. Or can you tell me what technique this is? Type it in the chat. Or is the answer to this variable 5? Yes or no in the chat. So simple questions like that create engagement. And then lastly, the teacher sets the mood during sync sessions. That means we have to have fun while teaching. It comes out in our facial expressions, it comes out in our voice. So it makes them, less bored. And final tip, which is not reflected in my previous discussion, is I am a believer for routine. It's very important to establish routine to our students. But eventually, routine gets boring. So please sprinkle extra surprises once in a while. What I do is sometimes I would surprise them with a graded recitation in my very last slide for sync session. Or sometimes I give them a pep talk. Or I remember when I was handling business majors, I inserted an application, not really in the syllabus, but to talk to them about how they can use this math technique to let's say, explain poverty incidents in the country. And they did really appreciate that extra lecture. Finally, for graded recitations, here are my tips or some of the learnings that I have. First, let's give room for students to commit mistakes. um, our students, they're so afraid to commit mistakes. And in math, it's very important for them to be comfortable with making mistakes so long as they recognize it and they know exactly how to move past that mistake. That means hindi po maganda para sa akin na one mistake, it already is reflective on their grade. So give them some room to commit mistakes. Second, feedback should be specific and direct. Do not give very blank comments such as that is incorrect or your solution is wrong. When I do graded recitations, I identify, let's say, this particular line you were incorrect, or why this particular technique doesn't work for this case, etc. Ask follow-up questions. Sometimes in the math department, we talk about the integrity of the solution of our students. And in graded recitations, this is an opportunity for you to separate those who just, maybe copied from a software or maybe asked a tutor to do it, and those who actually know how to do it independently. And you can detect this by asking follow-up questions, right? Himayin mo yung mga tanong, you would know exactly if the student chumamba lang or really knows what he or she is doing. And lastly, consider graded recitations as formative and not summative assessments. Long tests, they're summative assessments, but graded recitations are formative. That's why if they make mistakes in my graded recitations, they can keep on signing up for more graded recitations. It's very tough on the teacher, but in my experience, it's worth it. And finally, to create engagement and to ease the tension and their anxiety in attending grade recitations, a smile, a small pep talk goes a really long way. I have a student who told me that she appreciated that I remembered that she changed her Zoom backgrounds. Or if a student has a really nice quote in the Zoom background because nag hashtag manifesting daw siya. So a teacher recognizing na, oh, you have good lighting now, or I really like your Zoom background now. They know that you were, attentive, to these small details, and they appreciate it. Finally, let's give honest feedback, but let's not try to embarrass them. What do we mean by this? Graded recitations in my class are not recorded. So if a student makes mistake, I never bring up their mistakes in my sync sessions. That means if they make mistakes, it ends there. I don't say, oh, in the previous graded recitation, this particular student made this mistake. I never do that. And if another person makes or attends another graded recitation, I never say, oh, you made the same mistake as that person. Don't do that. It takes a lot of courage for our students to attend the graded recitations. So as much as possible, let's lessen their anxiety so that they will be more open to learning. That is all for this afternoon. Thank you again to the Ateneo Salt Institute for this opportunity. Magandang hapon po.
Well, thank you. We will now formally open the floor for questions. I will allow participants to unmute to ask questions, or you can send them via chat.
Okay. Bianca, I'd like to read a comment here
Okay.
by Dr. Benji Talosa. Are you teaching math as a major course or calculus, or are you teaching the core math 10 too? Sir Benji, for last semester, I was teaching only calculus. It was for one section was for SOSE, a SOSE major. The other was for a SAW major. But I also am teaching Math 10. In fact, for the first semester, I was teaching only Math 10 and not calculus.
Are the insights applicable for Math 10 too?
Okay, I'll be very honest, sir. No, I have a very different experience in my first semester. So I don't actually, you know, I'm very shy to talk about my first semester experience because in my assessment, it was not as fruitful. I'm not sure if that's the experience of my students, but it could partly be because nanganganay pa ako sa online learning. It's the first try, okay? And the Math 10 modules, I was very much dependent on the modules that were given to me, whereas in the calculus, given again the issues that I've been hearing, I was so determined to, be more efficient than in the first semester.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Sir Jude? Sir, I have a question. You mentioned that um, paying attention to the students during your oral or your
Sync sessions.
recitation, yes,
Yeah.
um, has been. Did you ever like felt overwhelmed? Because I understood that you didn't just handle like a few students. There were classes of them. So was there a point where you were overwhelmed? Because you've been talking about like the well-being of the students, but I just wanted to know that as a professor, how was
Okay.
that for you?
In the second semester, Bianca, I was fortunate that I was handling, I mean, the class, it's a 6 unit calculus. Organically, it's a 6 unit calculus course. But because of the quarterly setup, the 3 unit component is in quarter three, the other 3 unit is in quarter four. So I practically have the same set of students in quarter three and quarter four. That's why it I basically remember. It's very easy for me to remember their names, their faces, because most of them showed up in the graded recitations. Even their Zoom backgrounds, I noticed. So parang I don't have to force myself, but yun nga yung mga small short pep talks, yung parang when they enter the Zoom meeting, yung hindi agad magkaklase, hindi ako naiinis sa sarili ko that I start on time. When I say start on time, not necessarily the lesson, because if I feel that yung student medyo kailangan pa nilang, mag-simmer, I do that. Okay? So something like that. If alam ko meron silang long exam the previous class, sometimes we even talk about the long exam. Parang ganun, to make them feel comfortable. So parang it feels like I know them really well.
Thank you, sir. I just want to say that I appreciate your efforts as also a student who went undergo the online setting.
Thank you.
Any other questions, you may send them via chat or you can unmute yourself to ask.
So parang ganito yung sa class, no? Their questions.
Jude, follow up na lang.
Maybe.
Follow up. Yung sa question ko kanina.
Yes po.
You didn't want to reflect on the past, no? Pero moving forward, will you use yung insights na nakuha mo din sa calculus? Let's say if you are you teaching Math 10 this coming school year?
First semester, yes, definitely.
So pwedeng same thing ba? Same structure ng course?
Yes, that's my objective, Sir Benji, no? That, for example, I do orals in Math 10. So I now have a better grasp of how to do it well or appropriately, which hindi masyadong masakit. I would perhaps, maybe decongest some of my modules because in Math 10, at least the one that I was using in the first semester, there were so many things in the Canvas pages. So there's a very big overlap between things that I discuss in the sync and things that are written down in the module. But in my calculus course, I've decided that the more abstract goes into the Canvas page, the more routine I do it sync. And so far, that's my experience. So that's moving forward, that's my plan in the first semester.
Good. Thanks.
I guess there are no questions.
Um, maybe the participants are shy. But if you have like any other questions or ideas that you might have wanted to ask Sir Jude, we recommend going to gbseal.online/share and post them there so everyone can see and maybe Sir Jude can answer it there.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Sir Jude, for that wonderful sharing. Our next session would be starting at 4:10 p.m. 4:10 p.m. You may, for those of you who would like to stay and wait for our next session, you may do so. But for the others, you may now move to your next Zoom rooms. The link should be available in the email we sent with your customized schedule. Thank you and have a nice day.